Loss is a prevalent emotion in our lives. We all experience it at some point, whether it be from the ending of a relationship, losing a sentimental item, or losing a loved one. Loss is bound to happen at some point in your life. And of course, with loss comes grief and the different influences that it may have on people. Many games and media deal with themes of loss and grief in different ways, with games like What Remains of Edith Finch and Lost Ember, and movies and TV like Demolition and The Midnight Gospel. But there's one game that deals with grief and loss in a more subtle way, with it not being a forefront part of the game, but still having it make up significant pillars of the overall story. That game is Firewatch is an interesting case because on the surface, from what you see online and even on the official website for the game, Firewatch is described as a game about a mystery set in the Wyoming wilderness where an unknown person begins stalking you and the other fire lookout in the region, Delilah, and you have to get to the bottom of who's doing it. But at its core, Firewatch explores the devastation of loss and grief and the stigma surrounding it through not just the main character Henry, but through the other characters present in the game as well. Every character in Firewatch experiences loss in some way or another throughout the narrative, and we get to see how they each react differently to their circumstances, akin to how everyone may experience a different situation of loss in their lives, and how they may react to it differently than others. Cementing this game as a way someone may be able to confront their loss by exposing them to characters who may have gone through similar experiences. As for me, one of my very close family members has been diagnosed with a life-threatening illness twice, and even though they're perfectly fine now, they're still at risk of developing it again. Those initial 2 diagnoses were some of the most confusing and complex times of my life. I was still quite young, so to think I could have lost them at such a young age, as well as other complicated family things going on at the time, it all had a terrible impact on my mental health. To cope with how I was feeling, I turned to video games, as some people do in situations like mine, to find a way to escape, which video games managed to do perfectly. And while I didn't discover Firewatch for a while after everything went back to normal, it opened me up to reflect on some bottled emotions and thoughts I still had, which really helped me in my coping process. Our first 2 characters who experience loss and grief, Henry, who you play as through your time in the game, and his wife Julia, are introduced to us through the game's prologue. It's 1975 in Boulder, Colorado. The clattering of glasses and the faint sound of talking permeate through the bar. You see Julia. You approach her, drunk from spending the night with your friends. You see she's surrounded by other professors and students from the nearby university. You ask her through slurred words what her major is. Evolutionary biology, she says, and that she's a professor. She responds by sarcastically asking you if yours is toxicology, smelling the beer on your breath, burning you in the process. Worried if she's hurt your feelings, she asks if you want to split a cheeseburger. A week later, you and her are together. Flashing to the present, you're in an elevator, an old hiking backpack in the corner on the ground. Picking up the backpack, the doors open to a dingy parking garage. An old red truck lay in wait. Throwing your pack in the truck bed, you close the tailgate. A year goes by. You've moved into an apartment with a view of the mountains, drinking beer out on the deck. Life is good. Julia wants a dog, so you go to buy one. There's a little beagle that Julia instantly falls in love with, and an intimidating but seemingly gentle German shepherd. You choose to get the beagle and name him Bucket. Julia loves him. You love him too. Fast forward to 1979, you and Julia are sitting on the deck at 9:30 p.m, a warm heat radiating off the desert, and Julia asks what you think about kids. You say they're nothing special, and then Julia responds by saying, what if you and I had some? You say, that would be pretty good. Julia responds, in that case, we should probably get married. You enthusiastically agree. You close the door of the truck, now sitting patiently in the afternoon glow of the Wyoming backcountry. Ahead of you, an old wooden trail sign lay dormant in that same fleeting sunlight. Atop the sign, printed in black letters, adorned on a slab of orange wood, Thoroughfare Trailhead can be read. And next to it, a swung open metal gate perches above the dirt track, and you begin your hike into the Shoshone. It's a late night in 1980, and Julia is 4 hours late getting home after a night out. She hasn't called. She walks in after you've gone to bed, not quite drunk, but still clearly having been having a good time. You fight when she comes to bed, you two ignore each other all night. Waking up the next morning, you feel guilty and ask her how her night was. She says it was great. Still holding on to some resentment, you make coffee and go to work. Another year passes, Julia draws for her work and the places you two go. She decides to draw you and you pose like He-Man. You look awesome. You continue down the trail, the sun beating down through the trees, creating shafts of light that turn the ground into a deep yellowy orange, and the rocks of the trees cast purple shadows across the landscape. You continue down the track and look up to notice a flock of birds passing overhead, black silhouettes gliding through a dimming sky. A little ways ahead, you approach a trail sign. 2 forks look out, 8 miles ahead. You continue on and hop over a log, now facing the blistering sun, which snuggles between 2 twin peaks. It's now 1982. There's a festival in town and you and Julia decide to take Bucket for one of your nightly walks. One of the people from the festival tries to mug you with a knife. Bucket gets kicked and Julia gets flustered and nervous. Confronting the attacker, you decide to beat him up. The guy cuts up your arm, but you still manage to beat the guy up. As the police show up, Julia asks if you and her can walk a different path from then on. You agree and decide to walk by the river from that day forth. 2 years pass. Your plans to have kids is postponed because of work. Julia gets offered a job at Yale, on the other side of the country. She wants to move. You do not. You agree as long as she commutes back and forth, and you tell her not to pass it up if it's what she wants. She agrees and flies back to Boulder 3 times a semester. 3 years pass and Julia is sent home on paid leave after having an episode, lashing out at a colleague for borrowing books that she'd happily lended him 2 days prior. You find her crying in the stairwell, and in an attempt to cheer her up, make macaroni and drink wine together. It works, and you fall asleep together on the couch. Sitting at camp for the night, you open your journal and flip to a page of Julia's drawing of you. It reminds you of her. Julia comments that Bucket is getting older, which makes it easier as he gets in less trouble around the house, and a week later she goes back to university. Fast forward, it's 1987, but Julia's affliction is getting worse. She drives her car to the town over for no reason and has to be brought home by police. She's devastated and gets sent home on permanent medical leave. Some days you get the Julia you love, other days you get a total stranger. One night she takes you into bed to make love, and 5 minutes later she panics, believing her dad's at the door. You tell her family about what's happening. They're devastated and begin making trips to and from Australia to visit her. It's 1988. You spend your days following Julia around the house, waiting for the 2 weekly visits from her nurse, Daniel. He suggests she can live somewhere else with 24-hour care, but you're determined to take care of her yourself. Walking through an aspen grove, the path is more overgrown now as you get deeper into the mountains. You continue walking and come across a fallen log over a small rock slide. Walking slowly across as to not lose your step, a deer stands ahead of you, its stature standing tall among the aspens. As you approach, it raises its head and stares at you. You approach further, and the deer turns and pushes its hooves off the ground, throwing its head back before landing back down and bounding off into the woods. You continue on the trail. Time with Julia is hard, especially when you get mad at her, like when she tries to cook her own food. When she goes to sleep, you sit on the deck for a few hours, drinking, watching the local sports games. You start going out after she sleeps, but you get worried she'll wake up and walk around the house. You trust she sleeps like a rock. One night in 1989, you're pulled over at a DUI checkpoint and blow a .10. You're taken to jail for the night. You think of hiding it, but decide to tell your sister-in-law, Susan. After hearing about this, Julia's parents take the next plane over from Australia and see the terrible state your house is in. They tell you Julia is going to live with them for a while. You don't argue. You say you'll visit soon. A few weeks go by and summer is approaching. You see an ad for a job in the paper. You take it. The prologue introduces us to Henry and Julia and their relationship together. This section of the game is perhaps the most important, as it gives us the biggest insight into the overarching theme of loss of the people you care about and how people cope differently with grief. In the prologue, we experience Julia's rapid decline and eventual diagnosis of early onset dementia. She's only 41 when she's diagnosed. We see how this affects Julia and Henry's lives, with Julia losing her job after being placed on permanent medical leave, not being able to remember things in her class, her research falling apart, and slowly losing her grasp on reality, forgetting where she is, going into states of panic, and needing constant care from Henry, and eventually her family back in Australia. Henry, on the other hand, slowly witnesses every day how the woman he loves begins to slip away right in front of his eyes, and we see how he struggles to take care of her, their house being in disarray and getting mad at her for trying to cook her own food. He stays awake for hours after she goes to bed and eventually leaves the house to go out and needs to debate whether to put a chair in front of the door so she doesn't walk around and potentially get herself hurt, or trusting she sleeps the whole night. Eventually, it seems, Henry turns into an alcoholic, spending most of his nights drinking all year round, whether on the deck or out at the bar. As a consequence of this, one night Henry blows a .10 at a DUI checkpoint and is taken to jail. But he stresses knowing Julia won't be able to take care of herself, so he caves and calls her sister, and eventually she's taken back to Australia, leaving him alone. It's a devastating introduction, and in only a span of 10 minutes manages to confront the player with the grueling reality of the unforgiving swiftness of mental afflictions and how they can devastate a person's life and all those surrounding them. Still affected by the grief of Julia's condition, and in the wake of her moving back to Australia, Henry decides to do what a lot of people do when experiencing loss. He tries his best to escape the reality of the situation. Many find solace in escape, a small disassociation from the difficulties of the real world, and in this I see a lot of similarities within Henry and myself, and see how he can be a projection of how many other people experience grief. Going back to what I was talking about before, everyone experiences grief and loss in their lives, and even though many may not experience it in the same way as Henry or because of the same circumstances, he represents how the majority of people react to grief, attempting to escape rather than embrace it. Even attempting to avoid talking about it later in the game, not because he's reluctant to share details because of privacy, but because he's trying to get his mind off Julia's condition and maybe find some semblance of normalcy in what he does. And that chase for normalcy leads Henry to take a job as a fire lookout in the Shoshone National Forest, a real national forest nestled between the Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Forests. And it's here where Firewatch really stands out to me on a personal level. Henry, devastated by the loss of his wife, both in her mental fight against dementia and physically losing her when she's taken back to Australia, takes a job in the middle of the National Forest, 2 days into the middle of nowhere to escape his reality. When my family member was diagnosed, I also found myself trying to escape the situation I was faced with by turning to video games. There was a special kind of solace that I found in my time playing games, being able to travel to worlds far from my own where reality I had to face no longer mattered. It lifted a weight from my chest and took my mind off the confusing feelings I was experiencing. And gaming has been a thing that's stuck with me ever since. It's not just gaming that I use to escape, however. Similarly to Henry, nature has always been a big part of my life. Living in Sydney, around relatively green areas, I had the opportunity to experience and be in nature in a way that shouldn't be taken for granted. Hiking and mountain biking have always been hobbies of mine, so seeing a walking simulator set in the middle of the American backcountry, somewhere I've always wanted to visit, hooked me in by itself, never even knowing that the game tackled the themes it did. But not just the hiking aspect. One of, if not the main thing that brought me into Firewatch was, believe it or not, the firewatching aspect. Working in a fire lookout has always been a dream job of mine, unfortunately made impossible by the fact that there are very little still operating fire lookout towers surrounding where I live. This game gave me a little taste of what I'd always wanted to do, and it made me feel a sense of even more comfort that the completely alien situation to me I was going through couldn't. However, even with everything this game brought to me that gave me an escape, there's one character in the game that ultimately changed my perspective on how I approach spending my time with those I love, and appreciating what I have while it's still here. Delilah is the next character we're introduced to that we actively see experiencing loss during the gameplay. Delilah has been a part of the National Forest Service for 13 years, and every summer has had a job in her lookout tower. This job means a lot to Delilah, it's essentially her whole life, but when her job is under threat after the events that unfold in the game, incriminating audio of her making it sound like she actively started a fire with Henry, she begins to become extremely paranoid and understands the possible threat of this contributing to losing her job. With her job as fire lookout meaning so much to her, Delilah, when she eventually does lose her job at the end of the game, mourns over the loss of it when talking to Henry in the final dialogue. While Delilah may not experience loss to the extremes that Henry does, her situation reflects a common sentiment that many people who lose a job they love, or even their dream job, may experience. Now being forced to look for new work, most likely in a field they will not like or like as much as the one they've lost. It can be disheartening, and depending on the connections made there, which could potentially be lost over time, could send someone into depression. However, Delilah plays a much more important role in this game than just another person who experiences loss. She acts as a pillar for Henry. As a superior who eventually grows close to him, she grounds him in the reality of the situation he's facing, both with the mystery in the forest and with his situation with Julia, acting as a guiding voice through troubling times. Delilah is a representation of the people who try to help others through tough times, be it counselors, friends, or family. She acts as a reassuring voice to Henry throughout the game, and as an extension to the player. If you choose to bring up Julia to Delilah in the optional dialogue, she'll extend her condolences to Henry, and even try to reassure him that everything will be fine, and offer some good advice. However, it's her dialogue at the end of the game that I feel is the most important. At the end of the game, once you enter Delilah's tower to find she took the early helicopter, you put on her headset and talk.
Hello? Is anybody there?
Hi. Yeah, it's me.
You're not here.
No. Don't be mad.
I'm not mad.
You're not mad, you're just disappointed?
I'm not your dad after you got busted smoking pot.
I just couldn't be out there for another minute.
You could have just said that.
You really wanted me to stay.
I did. And now I'm...
Disappointed.
Yeah.
I know. Hey, it shouldn't take long for the helicopter to reach you.
Okay.
There's a debrief in a situation like this. Lots of questions.
Shit. So, taking stock, we found out an old lookout killed his only son and decided to become a lonely hermit.
Yes.
And we prevented one fire?
Basically started another.
Okay, so that's a wash.
I'll have to figure out what I'm doing every summer from now on that isn't this.
You're not coming back?
No. And you'll have to... I don't know.
Yeah, me neither. I don't know what's next.
Tell you what, why don't you choose for me and I'll choose for you?
All right, sure. Maybe... Maybe you could come back to Boulder with me and figure it out down there. Just a thought.
You don't want me down there.
Well, I just asked you.
Look, I've got some things to do in Casper, and maybe I'll head south sometime after that. I could come by, sure.
Okay. So, what about me?
I think you should go to Julia, and then you can figure it out. Maybe put that typewriter to good use. Give me a sexy accent or something if you write about this.
Yeah.
You gotta go see her.
Yeah, sure.
Henry, Look, you came out to put your memories behind you, and they're still right there in front of you.
You're right. I think you're right.
Good.
When I get back, maybe I could,
We shouldn't focus on this summer. Next year we'll roll around, and then the year after that, and then it's just I don't know. My Aunt Judy called it a pause in the hallway of time.
Did your Aunt Judy smoke a lot of pot?
Yeah?
Well, you should try to take her advice, too.
Yeah, we'll see.
There's the helicopter.
They'll land back where you hiked up. Good luck, Henry.
You too. Good luck.
No. Henry, you keep it for yourself, okay? Bye, Hank.
And that's the last we hear from Delilah. It's a short conversation, but it's one that lasted with me for a while after playing. You see, my escape from gaming wasn't just a short-time thing that I occasionally did to unwind. Unfortunately, it turned into an addiction. I hated to admit it then, and I still do now, but gaming went from a quiet pastime to taking up a huge portion of my life. I was starting to ignore things like my schoolwork and my family in favor of playing video games, but Delilah's advice to Henry made me think about how I spend my time, and made me realize that what I was doing to escape my problems never ended up fixing them, and instead prevented me from spending time with people I needed most, same as Henry. The more devastating and unfortunately common form of loss, however, is explored in the character of Ned Goodwin. Ned's place in the game is full of tragedy and desperation. Ned, ex-military, takes the same job as fire lookout and is stationed in Two Forks Lookout, the same one as Henry is assigned. What he didn't tell anyone, however, is that he brought his son, Brian, with him against regulations, as kids weren't allowed to stay in the fire lookouts. Reluctant to come along, as Brian's hobbies fell more into the nerdy category, Brian was forced by his father to learn the basics of rock climbing, and it was during one of these rock climbing lessons where a mistake from an incompetent father led to tragedy. While climbing in Cave 452 near the Two Forks Lookout, Brian's anchor in the rocks gave way, and he fell down a shaft in the cave, dying when he hit the floor. He was only 12 at the time.
Ah, shit. Are you... Oh, God. You're Brian Goodwin. You fell. Your stuff gave out. Oh, you poor fucking kid.
Even though Ned was more of an estranged father to Brian, not being very active in Brian's life and having a clear separation in hobbies, we can still see the effects of this sudden disaster on Ned. With him not even being able to say goodbye to his son, he was devastated. Even though he may not have been a good father, he was trying to share experiences with Brian and spend more time with him. After the accident, Ned refuses to go back to civilization, instead choosing to live in the woods in a survival bunker not far from the site of Brian's death. By the time the main story begins, Ned has already been living in the Shoshone for 3 years, which he reveals to Henry through a confession tape.
Yeah, hi, Henry. Hey, you better find this before it burns up. We've been causing each other a lot of headaches. Now I gotta go stake out a site that's as fit for living as the one you're about to find. You'll get it when you see it. You can't blame me for keeping an eye on you. Not after bumping into you back in May. Down by the cave, for croc's sake. I've been up here for 3 years. I kept it cozy. Winters are harsh as hell, and I ran out of books. But I got that antenna rigged up, and Delilah, she's a record you don't gotta flip. I kinda get why Brian took to her. About a week ago, I stopped worrying about you finding anything out, and that's right when everything went shithouse with you two. You guys don't know anything about having kids. All right, nobody knows nothing. It ain't Andy and Opie walking down the lake to fish every afternoon. It ain't Mayberry. But you gotta know I didn't kill him. All right, we were climbing. I was teaching him. Brian was uneducated in the way to do anything. He just fucking didn't sink his anchor the right way. You know, I thought about going back, having to answer questions, and having to get him put in the ground, and I didn't see the point. Don't come looking for me. Sorry about your wife.
Something he does in an attempt to seemingly keep people from discovering Brian's body, doing things like stealing the keys to Cave 452 to keep it locked, something Delilah mentions earlier in the game.
This cave is gated off.
It's to stop spelunkers from dying without getting the keys from the Forest Service office first.
Makes sense.
Although Debbie says she lost them like 3 years ago, so Maybe its mysteries are locked away for good.
But a point to note, as we heard in the confession tape and through his actions like stealing the keys, even though Ned did care for Brian, and he was devastated by Brian's death, it seems he hid out in the Shoshone to avoid legal trouble rather than to mourn the loss of his son. However, once Henry discovers Wapiti Station, a place where Ned used surveillance equipment from to spy on Henry and Delilah, in which Henry finds a wave receiver, Ned starts leaving clues for Henry, including a backpack that includes the keys to K452 and eventually a black box that brings Henry to the place where Ned had been hiding out with the aforementioned recording tape taped to the cliff edge. Ned, at this point, if you couldn't already tell, gave up on trying to hide his son's death, whether it be because he thought Henry would find out eventually, or whether he needed to get it off his chest, as the first fire that you saw earlier in the game had grown to such an extensive point, after joining with the fire that Ned started when he burned down Wapiti Station after Henry found it, that his son's body would eventually be lost to the fire, as Ned was evacuating the area to a safer place deep in the Shoshone. He must have felt like he needed to tell someone. This tragedy not only affects Ned though. Delilah, also knowing that Brian was in the park with Ned against regulations and choosing to keep it a secret, experiences a lot of guilt for the death of Brian, which she feels she could have prevented if she had just told someone he was in the forest, something she also shares with Henry after Henry tells Delilah what happened to Brian.
Hey, Dee.
There you are. I've been worrying my ass off.
You need to call search and rescue.
What?
There's a body in the cave. It's Brian Goodwin.
Gotta be fucking kidding me. How does that... What? I don't... How?
Climbing, I think, or made to look like a climbing accident.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just what it was. I mean, he was probably exploring the cave and maybe his rope gave out. Look, whoever locked me in there probably didn't even know about him. What do we do now, Dee? I mean, are you okay?
No, I'm not. He'd be alive if I had told someone he was out here. I don't know where he'd be, but I can assure you it would not be rotting at the bottom of that cave. There's nothing to say. Hike back. I think we're leaving tomorrow anyway.
While Delilah is not responsible for the death of Brian, she feels as if actions she could have taken could have prevented his death, which echoes the very real situations that occur in the real world, where someone who may accidentally cause the death of another person would feel tremendous guilt for something they could have prevented through their own intervention. The death of Brian Goodwin is one of two catalysts for the events of the game, with both surrounding loss and grief, with the other being Julia's sudden diagnosis of dementia. However, Brian's is more important to the overarching theme of the game, as tragically, sudden death accounts for about 15 to 20% of all deaths globally, which have a lasting and damaging effect on those around the person, especially close relatives who may never have recovered from the situation, with the potential to even develop psychiatric disorders like depression and PTSD. Ned is an unfortunate character, however, in the sense that the writers could have explored the more deeper and devastating side of grief with Ned, who arguably experienced the worst form of loss out of any character in the game, but it rather seems that they made him quite apathetic to the whole situation. But it does tie back to my point where everyone experiences grief differently to one another, and Ned is a good example of those who may not know how to approach how they are feeling, or just may not be very involved in the first place with their feelings towards loss. But all this is to say that Firewatch isn't just a game centered around a mysterious stalker who terrorizes fire lookouts in the middle of Shoshone. As a matter of fact, I'd say that that's second to the deeper meaning of the exploration of the game. Firewatch guides the players through 3 separate instances of loss and uses those as a stepping stone to have the player confront their own circumstances where they might have experienced loss and the emotions they may feel. It's an important story not just to gaming but to me as well. That no other game has ever influenced or affected me the way that Firewatch has. It really opened my eyes and showed me a better way to approach life and a better way to approach my feelings of loss and grief, and that's why in my eyes it's one of the best games ever made. I just want to take this time at the end of the video to say thank you for watching. I know it's been almost 3 months since my last video, but I've been very busy. namely playing Minecraft. I mean, look at this amazing house I built. But I also want to give a huge thanks to all the support on my Ark video. That video blew up more than I could have ever imagined. And all the support you guys have given that video really means the world. I mean, 96,000 of you took your time out of your day to sit down and watch my work. And I really can't thank you enough. But next video is going to be on the Horizon franchise. So look out for that in about 2 years.